Hi everyone and welcome to OneMinding. This episode is sponsored by VEMP, and today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Bill Pettit, who is a psychiatrist, a 3 principles teacher, and a generally wonderful man. So welcome, Bill. How are you?
Oh, I'm better than an almost 81-year-old should be, probably, Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I've followed your work since my first introduction to the principles around 10 years ago, and I quote you often. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Well, you're very welcome. I've enjoyed, we've talked for about 10 or 12 minutes before 15 minutes, and I've already truly enjoyed. I feel like you're 2 sisters from another mother or sort of thing. So
My heart feels like everything feels so warm, and so like I've met you before. It's quite incredible. And I have to tell you, Sam was so excited to get you on the show. As soon as you confirmed, she's, oh my God, I can't believe it, we've got Bill coming on. And I was looking through Twitter earlier, and Moles actually quoted you in 2019. The quote has gone from my head now.
When I've got me on my mind, that's when my troubles begin.
Oh, really? Wow.
Okay, you told me that, and that stuck with me for all these years.
Wow, it sounds like something I might say, but I don't recall saying it.
Oh, so for our audience, we've as we explained earlier, we are sharing the 3 principles with people that have never heard of it. So we started our original journey on Twitter Spaces, that's turned into a podcast that we do every week. So for some of our listeners that have never met you or heard of you before, Bill, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. And there'll be some people out there will say, oh, I can go do my dishes now because I've only heard Pettit talk about this about 40 times. But those that haven't, I'll talk to them that are still here not doing their dishes. Well, my name is Bill Pettit. My wife Linda and I, who's just a wonderful, it'd be wonderful for you to have her sometime. She's really wonderful. And we live here in Phoenix, Arizona. We moved here about 6 years ago. I will celebrate my 81st birthday, possibly. I feel good just in a couple of months, and it's hard for me to believe that I, Bob Seger. I don't know if you know Bob Seger, but he had a song in which he said, 20 years, where'd they go? 20 years, I don't know. Well, I feel the same about 80 years. Where'd they go? I don't know. One day at a time, I guess. So I am from the Midwest originally, and I went to medical school. Actually, I had a journey. I won't how much to tell, right? I was brought up in a very strict Catholic family, and I actually went to the seminary for 2 years after high school. And I was going to be a Trappist monk. Do you know what a Trappist monk is? They don't.
No.
They barely talk to, except for the abbot, and they don't eat fish, meat, or eggs, and they pray 7 times a day, and they go to bed at 7:30 and wake at 2:30, and I was for the first time ever, because of some experiences they'd had, this monastery did psychological testing. And everybody thinks this is funny, and it is to me now. It wasn't at the time. But they didn't. I took the testing in December, and I was supposed to go to the monastery the next August. And about 5 weeks before I was about to go, I was home I didn't have to work that summer because Dad figured I'd be working in the monastery labor on my whole life. And I was there with my younger sister, where there was 3 boys and 3 girls. And this letter came in the mail, and I wish I could find it. I mean, it's probably destroyed. I hope to find it in the bottom of a box someday. But here's what it basically said. It said, to the abbot really liked me. He had gone to high school even though the monastery was 400 miles from our home, 600 miles maybe. he had gone to high school with my mother, but he liked me. So he said it was hard for me because I prayed within Catholicism to the Holy Spirit to do this testing. And so I feel like I have to honor the testing. But, you know, if I'm as a doctor order psychological testing, I get the results back within 72 hours. This was 6 months. So he had these results, right? So the psychological testing basically said the following. Number one, there is no way that this young man could tolerate being cooped up in your monastery. Number two, there is no way your monastery could tolerate having this young man cooped up in your monastery. Now, it's very funny to me also now. It wasn't funny then. I felt that God had played it, you know, make up stuff, a mean trick on me and stuff. And my son, I have 3 daughters and a son. My son was at that monastery a couple of years ago with his 2 sets of twins, twin girls and twin boys. And he told the older abbot there, I mean, the older monk at the gift shop, he said, you know, 60 years ago, you rejected my father from your monastery. And the old monk looked at him and he said, well, he said, I'll bet you're glad. And these kids are glad. And he said, we are.
Oh my goodness.
So
he's not a Pettit, is he?
Pardon?
They said that he's not a Pettit, is he? They didn't recognize. Did they recognize your son? Well,
it was 60 years ago. You know, it was 60 years had gone by, you know. Wow. So anyway, so, but I went to medical school. I went to pre-med and then to medical school. And then I spent 2 years as a general surgeon, working 36 hours on, 12 off for 2 years, got exhausted, got drafted into the Navy, into the Vietnam War, and spent 2.5 years, 6 months training, and then 2.5 years as a family doctor for a squadron of Navy pilots and somewhat their families, but mostly for the Navy pilots. And it was during that time that I got interested, as I struggled myself with my own, I didn't know that I wasn't my thinking, not that I'm the only person that didn't know that. And so I struggled with depression that just seemed like it came out of the blue. And I also saw I started to see how much the level of peace that we're at, or lack of it, manifests in our body. And how things that we call even physical symptoms, let alone the psychological symptoms, are really benevolent alarms. Even what came to me in the shower, I was in Spain in 1919 at the Viva event, and I was going to speak that day on the mind-body connection. And as I was showering, suddenly it came to me, they're more than alarms. These symptoms that we get upset about are love letters. They're truly love letters trying to wake us up to look in a different direction. Much like the rumble strips on the side of the road. When do they have rumble strips? Yeah. And if you fall asleep or you're getting distracted and suddenly you hit the rumble strips, they're trying to save you from flipping over into the ditch. And if there's water in the ditch, maybe even people drowning and dying. They're love letters. They're not just alarms. They're benevolent and beneficent alarms, trying to shout, there's a different way, there's a different direction to look. I didn't know that at the time. So when I met Mr. Banks, I met Dr. George Pransky on January 1st of 1983, 40 years ago. We're just a couple of weeks from April Fool's Day. April Fool's Day in the UK? And some of you, you've probably heard me, Mollis, you've probably heard me say, I met Sid Banks on April Fool's Day, 1983, 40 years ago. I won't tell you who the fool was, but you can guess. Because I'm sitting there as a psychiatrist. I've been in psychiatry for 10 years. I'd left psychiatry to work for a company that did personal growth trainings all around the country. And I even did one in Tokyo, Japan one time. But I'd been in psychiatry for nearly 10 years. I'd had 800 lectures on mental illness, 0 lectures on mental health. And yet when I got board certified, guess what they called me? A mental health professional. Now, I don't know how you do that. You know, if I'd never taken one course in electricity, I don't think you could name me as a electrician. But I was named a mental health professional, even though I had never had one lecture on mental health. I'd been going in and out of depression for 20 years. I was 40, just a little shy of my 41st birthday, about half of my life before now. I'd seen 6 different psychiatrists. I'd never been hospitalized, close to it, but never. The psychiatrists were good people. And I want people to know that they were caring people. And they helped me through 6 different difficult times so that I continued my education and continued my work. Metaphorically, they gave me a fish when I was starving, but not one of them knew how to teach me to fish, so I wouldn't need them in the future. I met Dr. Pransky. We talked. I listened to him for a couple of hours over lunch at a little hotel in California. I remember driving over the big prison in California there, seeing the yard down below. And we spent 2 hours. He spent 2 hours telling me, this was 1983. He had met Sid, I think, in 1978. For 5 years. And if the 2 of you would have been, say, friends from school or from work and waiting for me at the coffee shop, and as I came back in after 2 hours with George, if you would have said, is this really a breakthrough in the field of that's going to make an impact in the field of psychiatry and psychology, like Einstein's 3 1905 papers did in physics? I think I would have said, I think it is. I really do. But then if you would have said, tell us about it, I would have said, well, it has something to do with the way we use this ability to think. I don't know, something about that. Now, I've had 26 and a half years of education at the time. I understand the English language. I'm in awe of people that know more than one language. I don't. I had 6 years of Latin, but that doesn't help me much these days. I haven't met too many people that talk Latin. And I wouldn't know how to do it myself. But I had a feeling, I can't say I was aware of any big insight, but you know, I had hope awakened. I mean, even as I talk, I almost get moved because I had hope awakened for the first time that maybe I didn't have to live in this constant daily struggle inside me. So on April Fool's Day, I went with about 250 other people to this hotel in San Francisco, where this welder with the 9th grade education It sounded weird to me, if it sounds weird to people out there. Was going to speak because he'd had this epiphany 10 years earlier in August of 1973. So this August will be the 50th anniversary. Anytime there's a breakthrough in science, it usually takes about 50 years for the old paradigm to be replaced. That sounds kind of bold, but things are happening faster and faster. More people are having hope awakened. That I feel that there's a turning point. It may not be while I'm alive, but yeah. So I sat there, and within 30 minutes, it's interesting that the man that sat next to me 40 years ago is still a lifelong friend, Billy Hutcherson, who recently had his 90th birthday, and he's 90 going on 15, right? In his spirit. He sat next to me that day. Within 30 minutes, this quiet man, he wasn't a Tony Robbins, he was sitting quietly, talking without a prompter, without notes, without anything. And within 30 minutes, I felt like 300 pounds had been lifted off of my shoulders, my chest. And I saw that my 20 years of intermittent depression that at times almost immobilized me and at times led me to having thoughts of ending my life. I saw that they weren't created by all the things that I thought had thought that they were created by. My depressions were not because I had familial depression on both sides of my family, including suicide. Only one then, but now on both sides. They weren't because I had alcoholism on both sides of my family, because all that is, what's hereditary about that is that people, when they're in pain internally, they find whatever gives them the most relief from that pain. It wasn't from my job as a psychiatrist, dealing with people who were struggling whether or not to take their life on a daily basis, often. It wasn't by my finances, it wasn't by my children, it wasn't by my wife when she wasn't in a perfect state of mind. It was because I was using this wonderful gift and power of thought to smash metaphorically against my head, against my being, 6 to 9 hours a day. And then wondering metaphorically why I had a sore head. I saw that my stress, I got a glimpse. I don't know that I saw that 100% of it was from the inside out, but I saw a pretty big glimpse that more than I ever could imagine was, now I would say it's 100%. The only person that has the ability, person, place, or circumstance that has the ability to truly take me away from my well-being is in the same underpants I'm in. It's a sophisticated metaphor, as I'm often prone to use. The last time I looked, there's only room for me. So that when I start feeling seriousness and I lose my lightheartedness and my love, I don't have to look to try to find out what's causing it. Now, taking responsibility for my experience is not a heavy burden. It's a light burden. It's light. It's, Elsie Spittle says, if we can just learn to take responsibility for our experience without burden, without blaming ourselves, like I should know better. I've been around this this many years. I can't believe I'm upset. No, that's nonsense. As Sid says, we're all going to get psychological viruses. Fear, anger, resentment, grief, upset. But we've got a virus detector. It's our feeling level. And the more spiritual understanding of what I'm going to call the system of life and what's behind life, our virus detector gets more sensitive. It picks up stress molecules sooner and sooner and lets us know. The metaphor that I had not used for, and stop me at any time, either of you, if they're, if I'm rambling or you just want me to just stop talking for a little bit.
Listen to you all day, keep going, yeah.
Metaphor that I hadn't used for a long time. It hadn't come to me. Because things come to me when my mind is quiet and I'm not trying to figure out what to say and when I'm just present. And the metaphor came with radiation. If you're going to be anywhere where there's a possibility of radiation, you want to have a good Geiger counter. You want to have a Geiger counter that picks up the smallest amount of radiation. You don't want it not to go off until you've got so much radiation that you've got a 50% chance of dying from some cancer that it's triggered, knocked out your immune system. You want to know when the very first trickles of radiation. I guess our late president, our past president, Jimmy Carter, who's 99 years old plus, is in hospice. This is a sidetrack, I have a little plaque that says, you're Irish if you have absolutely no idea how to make a long story short. My wife says there's absolutely no doubt that I'm 37% Irish. And of course, I'm celebrating my St. Patrick's Day 3 days early here. I'm starting a St. Patrick's Day week. In 1952, and I didn't even know this, Jimmy Carter was a young 25-year-old, I think, 27 or 25-year-old nuclear submarine person. But they have to go through extensive training in nuclear reactors because of and there was the first, I didn't know this, long before Chernobyl and before the one in Japan, there was a nuclear power breakdown in Canada. And the Canadians asked for help. This was 1952, but nuclear power was in its infancy. And Jimmy Carter headed a team of people, and they had to go in even with all the protection that they had in 1952, they could only go into this room for under 90 seconds. And because they'd have time to undo one bolt and then they'd get out and another member of the team would go in. And he was in for 89 seconds. And yet he peed radiation in his urine for 6 months. Now, to think that he lived to be 99 and he's still alive right now, I wonder if the level of understanding of some of those other men, whether they died early, I'd be interested to know whether they were able to withstand that 90 seconds of radiation the same way that he was. So we want to realize that we're taking on stress. Now, there's a paradox, because if stress comes from the outside, from circumstances, people, places, and things, then you want a high tolerance for stress. because you can't avoid it. It's the only, I used to take pride in being weighed down with 250 pounds metaphorically of stress and still be able to function every day. I don't even want 1 pound of stress now, because I know where it's created from. Innocently. I hope people hear the word psychological innocence. Because once you see that for yourself and for others, you're free from prison. You're free from a prison of who's to blame. You or me. What if no one's to blame? What if we're all, even people that do horrible things, if they'd known just a little more? That's why these courses for children's, my guide, you're familiar with My Guide Inside, The Spark, iHeart. We're teaching children that, the first 4 lessons of My Guide Inside, and of course, I'm going to put a plug in for it. It's the one I'm most familiar with. It has a teacher's manual and it's online now, but they have the hard copies too, but teacher's manual and a student manual for grades 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12. I know it's been translated into Hebrew, into Italian, into Spanish, I forget how many languages now for children. The first 4 lessons for first graders. Have either of you seen My Guide Inside? Actually seen it? No?
No, I haven't. Have you, Miles?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, because there's the Guide Inside, the Spark initiative as well, isn't there? But the one I know most is the iHeart, which is the UK-based one.
Okay, well, and I may, to be careful here. The thing I love about the My Guide Inside is the person that put it together, Krista Kamsel. She and her husband knew Mr. Banks like within a year after his experience. And so she's not afraid to reference Dear Liza and reference the spiritual. A lot of people have taken this understanding, and because spiritual understanding informs your psychological understanding, they've taught it as a psychological understanding and conveniently left out the spiritual understanding that informs the psychological understanding. And I can't tell you how many people contact me because they've been around the principles for 6 or 7 years. And all they heard was the psychological understanding. I'm feeling my thinking. And then when something happens, like they lose a child or they lose a spouse suddenly, or massive economic, if they don't really know that they're spiritual beings, they just kind of thought it was a nice, if they don't have the spiritual understanding, they're suddenly sitting in the corner mumbling, I'm feeling my thinking, and they don't know where to go. So that's just, and I need to slow down enough to really be able to speak to the other two also, because I know a lady that has the spark inside, and Brian and Terry Rubenstein are just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. So I'm just more familiar with it. But I would ask you, as I'm talking here, if it's okay, to imagine that the 3 of us are first graders. And the teacher comes in, and let me see, I could just wing it, but you'll see that I have my Bermudas on here. The first 4 lessons, I was thinking, I just have the teacher's manual. I haven't got the student manual. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to 45 seconds of the first 4 lessons for first graders. I had 26 and a half years of formal education. No one ever mentioned these 4 first lessons for first graders. Had they mentioned them and engaged me for a week before they went to the next one with stories and games, the first 40 years of my life would have been much more gentle. And the lives of many people around me would have been much more gentle. There'll be a day when there'll be first graders all around the world hearing these 4 lessons. Is it okay if I share them?
Love you too.
The first lesson, the teacher comes in, we're sitting there, little first graders, and said, kids, this is so exciting to be with you. We're going to have so much fun together. This first week, we're going to cover a lesson, and the lesson is that you have a guide inside. Everyone has a guide inside. And you can trust that guide. You can recognize that guide by the feeling that it always comes in. It's always a positive feeling. And it brings clarity. It's like comes like the bleat of a lamb, not like the roar of a lion. Fills you up from the inside with a nice feeling. And it allows you to see what to do next. We all have a guide inside. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that were true? Wow. I would have liked that first grade. Next week, teacher says, well, we've did all these games, we've done stories. I think most of us, and I've taken sharing, and looks like you're pretty well aware now that you have a guide inside, that you're never without. It's always there. Number 2, your thoughts create your feelings. What? I thought it was what Joey just called me. I can't tell you how many fights I had in 1st and 2nd grade because of my size of my ears when my head was a little smaller. Kids wondered if I'd been able to go airborne, and they referred to Dumbo. I would come home with my shirts torn from fighting daily, 1st and 2nd grade, often. Your thoughts create all your feelings. All your feelings come from your thinking. Now, I would clarify, even most of our thoughts are not conscious. You can't control it. If either of you, when we met this morning, because even though we had met, Sam, I don't know that I recalled, because I have met so many people in those settings. But if I met you then, or if I met you and Jim now, and one of you, as I said hello, and we kind of said hello over this screen, if I suddenly had a tear in my eye and my stomach turning and hair standing on end on my arms, I've grown to understand that some memory is being awakened, but I don't have to go to try to figure it out. All I have to do is to stay in the present. So as I was just enjoying meeting you, pretty soon something would have come up and said, you know, Jim, she looks like a Mary Jane that was killed in that motor vehicle accident when you were a senior. She really could be her, maybe not her twin sister, but she could be her sister. If we know that, we're not frightened by our experiences. We know they're thought created. That's the only experience a person can have, is a thought created experience. But if you're not frightened by it, and I'll be glad to tell a story in a little later or anytime, to make that point, maybe after I finish the 4 lessons, I'll see if there's any thoughts or questions and make a note of that. So that's the second lesson. First graders, your thoughts create your feelings. All your feelings come from your own thinking. Wow. It's an inside out job. Why didn't somebody tell me that? As Jack Pransky said, because they didn't know. They didn't know. Number 3, happiness is inside of me. Or the teacher would say, this week, you've learned in the first 2 weeks that you have a guide inside, and then you've learned that all your feelings come from your thinking. Now, we're going to learn this week that happiness is inside of you. Wait a minute. I thought it was when that pretty girl thought I was cool. Or I won a tennis match over somebody that was said to be better than me. Or I got a good grade in medical school. You're saying happiness is inside. Now, if it was outside like I thought it was, every day I had to get more of it. Otherwise, I starved. It's not that I don't like winning a tennis match or having somebody think that I'm cool or getting a good score. But if those are like frosting on the cake, I like frosting. But even without frosting, I'm never going to starve if the cake is inside of me. I'm going to wake up every day with plenty of cake. Happiness is inside of me. And I started to see, if I understood that there was a guide inside and that my feelings come from my thinking, that when I started to lose a beautiful feeling, if I just did the best that I could to be where I was, my thinking would quiet down, the clouds would pass, and the sun would be out again. Happiness is inside of me. I often use the metaphor, if you've looked on my website, that our mental well-being is like a cork. We can innocently push the cork under the water. It's hard. We usually get chronic fatigue and our shoulders start to ache or some old injury, or we get alarms that we're pushing the. But as soon as you do the best you can to get where you are and let go of your thinking, even a little bit, the cork does not need a GPS to find its way back to the surface of the water, does it? It's the same of our mental well-being. When I was preparing for today, or just sitting quietly, it's interesting that it only came back to me now, but I said what came to me, and I giggled. We were talking earlier that I don't try to find funny finds me, because I realized I was going to say, listen, folks, it's really simple. And the reason it's really simple is because it's simple. Or something. I mean, it sounded really silly when it came in my head, because the reason I'm going to tell you it's simple is for one simple reason, which is it's simple. Real complicated, right? Mr. Banks used to say, when the answer is simple, it's the spirit. When the answer is complicated, it's the intellect. So now, lesson 4, this, you've probably heard me say, I did get spanked a few times when I was a kid. I think from age 6 to 8, I might have averaged 3 times a week. I don't know. The treatment for oppositional defiant disorder in the late 1940s in the United States was wait till your father gets home. Right? Now, my father was a good man. I'm sure he hated after working all day to come home and have to spank his child. But I really think from the belief, and I know I'm on dangerous ground here. I'm not challenging anybody's belief, but the belief that what was behind life was a judgmental and punishing God, that any sign that I was headed that way you had to beat the devil out of me. That when he said it hurt him more than it hurt me. I mean, as a 7-year-old, my thought was, you want to trade places? But I never said that. But I came to see that he really thought he had to beat the devil out of me to save me from an eternity of damnation. Wow. I could see how that would hurt him more than me, to have to do that, to feel obligated to do that. I remain mischievous to the very day. I try not to do mischievous at anybody's expense, but so lesson number 4 for first graders. On my good days, I've had a few days that was a B. Most days a B- on my good day. On a bad day, I get a D+. This is the 4th lesson for first graders, and I've been exploring the principles for 40 years. It's a little humbling, right? Are you curious of what do you know what the 4th lesson is?
No.
Are you curious what it is?
Very.
The 4th lesson, kids, this week is, we learned last week that happiness was inside of us. This week, we're going to learn that we can realize that we're thinking fast and furious. And we could do our best to get present. And soon we'll experience ourselves as calm and curious. Wow. It can't be that simple. It can't be. It's got to be more complicated than that. Yeah, people used to actually say that to Sid. They'd say, I might listen to you if you didn't say that it was simple. Sid would say, what? If I made it more complicated, that doesn't make sense. He said, I could try, but it's hard because it's simple. Or they'd say to Sid, I'd listen to you if you weren't so darn certain. Sid would he'd rub his face and he'd say, so if I felt like I didn't really know what I was talking about, you'd listen better. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, so I've rambled on here for 40 minutes. Let me stop and listen.
It's been lovely listening to you. I could listen for hours. Yeah, I didn't know as much about the program that what did you say it was called? The program that you mentioned with the 4 lessons?
Oh, My Guide Inside.
My Guide Inside. I didn't know that much about that one.
See the 2 little owls?
Yeah.
There's another separate book, and it's called Who Has a Guide Inside?
See, I just thought it was a book, and I didn't actually realize it was a full program that was taught in schools, which
it's taught in a number of countries.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And this one is Who Has a Guide Inside? And for little children, it's wonderful because how does the squirrel know to hide nuts so he doesn't starve in the winter? How does the horses, it has the horses, it has the dolphin, it has the heron, it has the busy squirrel, beautiful pictures,
Yeah.
but yeah, and it's knowing myself and understanding my world. There's a teacher's manual for and a student manual and it's now it's online, and it's very money wise friendly, and you'll see kids talking, and Krista talking, and the woman that she did it with, Kathy Marshall Emerson, is a friend for almost 30 years. And she teaches doctorate nursing students that are getting their doctorate to become heads of teaching programs for nurses at the University of Minnesota, and teaches spirituality, and has been the director of the National Institute of Resilience for almost over 25 years. So she and Krista put that together. She has done a book, if you know any parent that's struggling at all with being a parent, this little book is 25 pages, and it's gentle and it's profound. Are you Parenting with Heart? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah. I've heard of that one, yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
That's and the parenting. I was listening to Mavis Khan recently, and she was talking about teaching. She used to teach adolescents that were in trouble, in the prisons, and she said one young man was talking about his childhood and how awful it was, how he wasn't parented well, how he was neglected. And one of the other kids actually said to him, it wasn't Mavis, it's one of the other kids turned and said, yeah, but that wasn't because you were a bad kid. That was because they didn't know how to parent, which led you into being a bad kid. And it was just like, that's what I love, is that when you talk about it's going into schools, it's going into prisons, it's going to young adults. I get so excited when I get a young person come to speak with me. It's not only that they're learning it, it's that it's so simple to share that they're going to share it with other people. Just, that's so wonderful, because we're not sitting from a place of, yes, you did your 26 years of studying, of taking in information. This isn't that. It's, you just can hear one thing, and that you share that one thing with other people, and that's the ripple effect. That's the change that we're going to get to see. That's why you do what you do, why we do what we do, why people create these programs. And I just think, going back to that word hope that you said at the beginning of the call,
yes,
like what Sid gave us. And I'd love you to speak a little bit more, because we're very passionate in OneMinding, and what we share, that the spiritual aspect is very, very important for us to teach. So I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. See, the formless can inform the form. The spiritual can inform the psychological. Psychological can't inform the spiritual. Doesn't go backwards. Was fortunate enough to be mentored by Sid for 26 years. He used to call me on the phone. He used to send me little audio cassettes. He had an incredible sense of humor. Trying to think, there was something that was coming to mind, but it's Sid had his experience, and if anybody is interested at all, if they say, "Oh, this sounds like a cult," or whatever, you're familiar with the website www.sidbanks.com,
yeah,
where you watch, listen, read. In 2000, that was 27 years after Sid's experience in 1973. For 27 years, he had been videotaped, but he had not shared the videotapes with anybody. And they brought 100 people together at Long Beach, and they videotaped 3-day, I think it was, my first wife of 31 years was dying of cancer at the time. And so I did not go to that first meeting that they had. It was just a few months before she died. But that meeting, and then it was filmed and then edited and made into 3 about 30-minute videos that had part 1 and part 2. And then the 4th one was about 44 minutes, and it was in 3 parts, right? So there's 3, 6, 9, or 2, 4, 6, there's 9 about 15-minute videos called the Long Beach Lectures. That was 2000. And the reason that came to be, even that a number of people, I mean, I think Dickon, myself, Judy Sedgman, Keith Blevins, George and Linda, said to Sid, we know that you don't want followers. We know that. Sid said, I don't want followers. I'll talk to clergy. I'll talk to educators. I'll talk to doctors. I'll talk to mental health professionals. I'll talk to teachers. I don't want followers. And we said, we understand that. But you're 70 years old now. You're not going to live forever. We need to have, or I don't know if we said need, but it would be so powerful to have the people that aren't going to be able to sit and talk with you like we have in person, to be able to sit and listen to you as if you were in their living room or in front of a stage. Please let us videotape you and share it with people. And he finally said, okay, I see. And he did. So the idea, I never met any cult leader that waited 27 years before he allowed himself to be videotaped. And that within the first 3 minutes says, please don't believe anything that I say just because I said it. Because if you do, you've become a follower and you've given up your freedom to think on yourself for your own. Don't ever be a follower. Don't ever believe somebody just because of their authority, because within you is all the wisdom you need. If you can allow yourself to get present and listen. It's okay to be a listener. Because what's within you, I love in the Enlightened Gardener Revisited, he makes it, which is an extraordinary statement, but boy, it rings true for me. Basically says, he said the character Andy in the Enlightened Gardener Revisited says, as huge as the universe is, with billions of galaxies, each with billions and billions of stars, the universe is minuscule. I think that means really, 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 really small compared to what is within the consciousness of every human being on earth. Wow. Wow. When I'm lost and I get tempted to start looking out there for the answer, I remember all I have to do is to get present and quiet. It may not come as quickly as I want it. I may not get the next 20 steps, but 100% of the time when I've been willing to do that, and 100% is a pretty good test score. 100% of the time when I've had the humility to know that I didn't know, and to allow my personal mind to quiet by just getting present as best as I could, I have seen what to do next. 100% of the time. Maybe not as quickly. A lady one time brought from her spiritual calendar, she brought a page for that day, and she said, I thought of you today. And she handed it to me, and it said on the page, it said, human beings are the only of God's creatures that go faster when they're lost. Wow. That's a powerful statement.
Very
It
powerful.
reminds me of something that I read the other day that said, if you don't have enough time, then slow down. And it's so true. It's so true. I mean, I think you are, well, you're definitely, for me, the first person that I've ever spoken to that has directly been mentored by Sydney Banks. And we talk about him on most of our shows, don't we? I would love to hear some stories that maybe you've never told before. I'd love for you to tell us something about Sid that we can then share on other podcasts. But yeah, I'd love to hear some first-hand experience from you, Bill.
You know, I don't know if there's any stories that I've never told before, but I'll see what comes to me. I mean, Sid, you know, and people will sometimes hold this against him. Sid had moments where he would get psychological viruses. I think he would have times when he saw the potential and the possibility of people that there could be peace in the world if enough people were at peace. Because if everybody was at peace, the idea of war would be like, let's see, should I stick myself in the take a stick and stick myself in the eye or not? You know, it's like, oh, I think not. It wouldn't make sense. But he generally came out of it quickly, and he was back home, and he was incredibly generous. He was incredibly kind. He was funny. He just had a really funny sense of humor. He would call me saying that his cat was having a psychotic break and he needed help or something. Would I talk to his cat? Or, you know, I mean, he was silly. And some of you may have heard about me calling him up after, you know, in 1987, 88, the only book that we had was Second Chance. So whenever I got lost, I would read it. I was buying it at the time, 40, 50, 60 in a box at a time and giving them to my clients when I saw them, and then telling them that the next time they came, they could either pay the $9 or whatever it was, or they could return it. And 19 out of 20 kept the book. Have you heard me talk about the end of the question at the end of the first chapter in Second Chance?
No.
Do you know the question?
No.
No. Well, there's a question where the man, you know, and this story in Second Chance was actually based on a true experience that Mr. Banks had, where he was in Hawaii and he was watching the sunset, and this man came up out of nowhere without even introducing himself and started pouring his heart out about how his wife had died and he had this terminal illness. And Sid changed it. He changed it to where he was from and what kind of business he was in and where the cancer was, and he changed it, but it was based on a true experience.
I didn't know that.
Didn't know that. Yeah, it's the only one of the 5 stories. You know, there's the missing link, which is just facts, you know, the core facts, and then there's 5 stories. And I kiddingly say, you know, you guys know the missing link, of course, and
That's my favorite.
big spaces, and you know, and it's not a story, it's just the facts. And I tell people with a straight face, don't pull it off well sometimes, but I say, you know, Sid tried to tell people to do this, to put it spaces between, because it was so powerful, but the publishers first didn't listen to him, so they put it in prose with no spaces. But after the third person's brain exploded, because of the lawsuits they faced, they said, maybe we should put the spaces. And then somebody will say, did that really happen? I say, no, just in my head, you know. But it would feel like it, I think, if you tried to read that in prose, if somebody took the spaces out. Anyway.
It'd be amazing to have a copy, one of the original copies that didn't have it in
yeah,
there.
it never happened.
Oh.
I made that up. No, I made that. That's all made up. That's all made up. Yeah, now people are going to say, Pettit says there was an edition. I wonder where we can get one. No, there's no.
What's the original first edition that blows people's heads up? Yeah.
Yeah, it always had spaces. But in the second chance, so the fourth time, I'm reading this book for the fourth time. Yes. Because I'm kind of lost and overwhelmed, and I come to this on page 18. This man says, how can there possibly be an answer to this? He gazed at me with total compassion on his face. He could sense this man cares, The trouble is, you see this world as the only reality that exists. You have trapped yourself on a level of consciousness. You must learn to take the limitations off life and see that there are more realities than meet the eye. And even though it's a dangerous place to tread, maybe later we can, because some people see this as a religion, and I think it's worth, many people feel comfortable talking about that. I do. It's not a religion, but I can understand why people misunderstand that. And I can talk about that if you're interested. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like that. Thank you.
His words took me by surprise. It was not the kind of answer I expected, nor had I ever heard such an incredible statement. I sat utterly speechless for a moment and then replied, "What you just said doesn't make any sense to me. Just doesn't make sense." His eyes twinkled. "I didn't expect that it would," he replied. Wow. Normally, I would have felt angry and insulted by such a statement. But his honesty, and I would say, earlier, you could feel his compassion. He knew he wasn't being mean. His honesty was so ingenuous that I found myself smiling. We sat in silence for a while, and then I inquired, "What is your idea of success?" Powerful question. He looked out to sea as if he were pondering. "Simple," he said. "Happiness and contentment." "Is that all?" I questioned. "Just happiness and contentment?" "Yes," he replied. "Don't you think that's enough?" Wow. I'm remembering that moment. I had not seen that the first 3 times I read this. I wasn't ready to hear it. Happiness and contentment. If I have that, I have access to all the gifts I've been given. It's not that I sit around because I'm happy and contented looking at my navel. There is actually a word for that. I didn't realize there. I should write it down. There is actually a word for contemplating your navel. It's a long word. No, but when you're really happy and contented, we all know that feeling. You're present and you're free. You're free of all that wasted energy that you're free, and you have your creative, you're free. So I called Sid up in Salt Spring Island in Canada. This was probably 1988. I said, "Sid," and we talked. He was so glad to hear me, and because I was one of the first psychiatrists. There's another brilliant man, Gordon Trockman, whose training was at Yale, Harvard, and Johns Hopkins. So his IQ is about 60 points higher than mine. But he's a wonderful man. So, and very bright man. But anyway, so Sid says, "Oh, Bill, you know," I said, "Sid, I'm calling because I got my latest box of Second Chance. I got that new edition that you did, where you added that question at the end of the first chapter about what's your definition of success." I said, "That's just a wonderful addition to your book. It's really powerful at the end of that first chapter." Well, he starts laughing, and then he's laughing harder and harder, and I actually get a little bit irritated, right? Because he's not saying anything, he's just laughing, and he can see it's getting funnier and funnier, like I didn't hear the joke. Who told the joke? And finally, I said something like, "Pardon me, Mr. Banks, but what is so darn funny?" Hopefully I said darn, but it's not terrible if I said damn. He said, "Well, Bill, I'll tell you what's so funny is that I've never changed one word. Not one word have I ever changed in that book. It was always there. It's always there." If people want to hear about the experience that Mr. Banks had, I would encourage them to go to www.sidbanks.com and go to watch and go to the Long Beach lectures. And even if you want to, skip down to the third one, the experience, where he describes what happened. He describes the experience that he had. And I've got a little quote here. You know, he had a 3-day experience that then culminated on the third day with very powerful. He said, "I saw there is no such thing as insecurity. It's only thought. It hit me like a ton of bricks." He never threw his adoptive parents in Scotland. He was he was illegitimate, had a teenage mother who was adopted to a poor family in Scotland. He never threw them under the bus, but the closest that he came to describing, he said, "Once I saw that no such thing as insecurity," he said, my whole history of poor Sid, and he says the horror of my childhood, a pretty strong, difficulties. Horror is a pretty strong word. I never heard him mention that until I listened for the 15th time to the Great Illusion. The horror of my childhood, I think he says, melted away. And I felt even profound love and compassion for those that had harmed me. Wow, talk about freedom. Talk about freedom. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I stood up and suddenly it was like I was being sucked down a tunnel. There was a buzzing sound and I was enveloped in a white light. It was then that I realized the true meaning of God, and I started to cry. Wow. Tears of joy. That the true meaning of God was pure love and understanding, not judgment and punishment. That even as the quantum physicists now say, God mind is there, and Sid would say God is the energy of all things, either in form or formless. Nothing can possibly be separate from the whole. If that's true, then we're not separate from the whole. We are divine energy, little divine entities, as he says, trying to find ourselves and uncover what we are. This looks solid, feels solid, but they tell me that it's made of atoms, and each atom has electrons going 3/4 the speed of light around it. A lot of shit going on in here that I wasn't aware of. My lemon tree in the backyard. I love my lemon tree. It's full of a lot of beautiful lemons right now. They're not as sweet as my neighbor's who has an orange tree. I always feel like it's not a fair trade when I take lemons over and they give me these sweet oranges, but they like it for their tea. So my lemon tree and I have a lot in common in that we're both a manifestation of the same energy. I don't think the lemon tree can become aware that it is divine energy. So that's why Sid says on page 6 of the missing link, when the divine passes from the formless to the form, as human beings, we are both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. Lemon tree is alive. I'm amazed when I see the little teeny ants running around. They're alive. Sometimes they're carrying little crumbs or they're carrying an injured ant. Wow, it's alive. What is life? It's sharing it in form that the energy that people call God. Sid said to me a number of times, Bill, I saw what people call God is. I saw what life is. And I saw how the two are connected. That's what he saw. What people talk about are the 3 principles get watered down. Long way from that. I saw what people call God is, saw what life is, and I saw how the two are connected. That's the system that we are part of. This divine energy that we are. And this divine energy is omni-intelligent, knows everything. Everything, it's a big word. Universal mind. It's conscious. The world is conscious. It's conscious. Rocks, did you know that rocks, when somebody tries to grow something around rocks, that it somehow senses what trace elements it has, and there's a connection between the plants, things that are growing, and the rock gives up what trace elements it has to the surrounding things that are trying to grow. It looks like just a dumb old rock. There's a consciousness, and there's a creativity, mind, consciousness, thought. If you surround a bed of flowers on all 3 sides and on top and cover it over, but you leave one end open, what happens? If you leave one end open of this bed of flowers to the sunlight, what happens to the flowers?
They go towards the sun.
They start actually bending. Pardon me? There has to be consciousness. Have to be aware. There has to be an awareness that we need more sun. And when they bend, of course, well, we'll get to that. They not only get more light for themselves, they get light for as far back as possible to the other. There has to be a consciousness. We're not getting enough sun. There has to be an intelligence. What we need is, we got consciousness, mind. We need to somehow get more sun. We realize we don't have enough. Intelligence would say we need more. Intelligence, mind. Thought is the creative force. So thought says, I can do that. It stimulates mind. Sid says it catalyzes mind into action. Mind, thought, and consciousness. The flowers get the light they need. We've been gifted with the personal use of that force that just brought light to those flowers. The personal use of mind. There's only one mind. There's the mind of God, the mind of universal. I tell people, I had one couple that said, we don't feel comfortable with the word God. I said, well, fine. But we understand there's something behind life. I said, fine. What word do you feel comfortable with? They said, Dave. I said, no problem. From now on, it's Dave. It's fine. It's a label. It doesn't matter to me. I know it does to some people, but it doesn't matter. We've been given the personal use of the mind of Dave to go through life. We've been given the personal use of Dave's consciousness, universal consciousness that's everywhere in everything in creation. And we've been gifted with the power and principle of creative principle of thought. They're all the same, but they're just speaking to three aspects. It's just a metaphor. Like Sid says, the greatest mystics of the world, after I said the divine passes from the formless to the form, and we become spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. The great mystics of the world who tried to explain such knowledge had no choice but to speak in metaphors, knowing their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom, formless wisdom, that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. All is a really big word. And you've probably heard me, so I'd say, like John Smith, I'm just picking a word. I'm working with John Smith, and he's been depressed for 40 years. And he says, I don't have that. I don't have that. And he won't hear that. I said, oh my gosh, John, I just realized there's an asterisk here. Right after it says that lies within the consciousness of all human beings, there's a little asterisk. I can't believe that I never saw it before. It says all human beings except John Smith. He gets to be special. He doesn't have this spiritual wisdom. I said, oh my gosh, John, I'll be sending a refund to you. Shall we talk soccer? What's your favorite soccer team? Well, I said, I'm sorry, John, bad news. You don't get to be special. You have this same wisdom that we all have. All human psyches, this is all in italics following, are rooted in universal truth. Another way of saying divine energy. No person's psyche is better than any other's. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. Wow. Wow. So did you have anything from what I've rambled on about that you wanted to say here?
No, I just think it's so much. And I think it's so important that, we are touching on the deepest part of what Sid was pointing to, because that's where I've seen that the healing comes from. That it's not that we need to have the answer to the question. It's the question that it kind of allows us to expand and open up and drop out of our intellect, out of our minds, and touch that deeper space. And then everything just changes. And I know that was my experience. I know that's Gem's. I know for you working in mental health that it must be so, you must be so unusual in the field that you're in. And I'd be really interested for you to just touch on that as well, if possible, that, you know, what's your experience like of actually being in a psychiatric ward? And I'm sure you've seen profound changes in people where there was not expected to be change. And I know what I do know of you is that you always see the mental health inside the person, no matter what.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Right. Because of the limited time, I'm going to refer people both to my website, which has resources under it, and Elizabeth Alovius in the UK. You know, it was her website that I originally did it for. There's a series of about, I think, 14 podcasts. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, it's what's it called? Her website is,
well,
I was looking at it a couple of days ago.
Yeah, it's away from me, but it's under, I have them on my website under resources.
Yeah.
And they're with Elizabeth, and she contacted me and the first one is called One Cause, One Cure. And then there is a series of like a dozen that goes through the DSM-5, ICD-11 diagnostic categories. And from my clinical experience, there's stories of hope, anxiety disorders, stories of hope, depressive disorders, stories of hope, addiction disorders, stories of hope, post-traumatic stress disorders, stories of hope, schizophrenia and psychotic disorders, stories of hope, manic depressive disorders, stories of hope, personality disorders, psychopath, borderline personality, narcissist. They're just people that have gotten stuck at a level of consciousness. They're not a thing. And it goes through eating disorder. It goes through every one of the primary. And then the last four that we did in just last year, there's two on the autism processor. I don't call it an illness, and it can, if without understanding, it can be disabling. And the ADHD processor. There's four on the and under neurodiversity, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm just going to refer people there. I mean, I could tell stories, and if you want me to tell, they're so outside of reality that it's hard for people to understand. And I'm glad to do that. I just don't want to get going fast though and lose the feeling.
I tell you what we'll do is we'll carry on in the direction we were going in, but maybe in 6 months we can get you back on. And
you can do it sooner than that. You can do it sooner.
Okay. And I think that'd be really good because we've both come into the principles from our own mental health issues, and we're really passionate about helping to be part of the creation of a mentally healthy world. I think it'd be really lovely to do something else with you on that. But I love how the depth of where we've touched on this call. It's been amazing.
Well, and we can do that because I'll just touch on for today, and I'd be glad to talk about this more. A religion, to me, has at least 4 components. It has dogma. You got to believe this or you're an infidel. Sadly, there's been more people killed, even among the Christians. You've got the Catholics and Protestant war of 100 years, and between the Muslims, the Sunnis and the Shiites. I mean, pardon me, it's just crazy, right? Anyway, but you have to have a dogma that if this is the truth, and if you don't believe it, you're okay. Usually in religion, there's rituals. You have to wear this kind of clothes, or this on your head or not on your head, or you have to pray on these days. I mean, you have to eat. It can sometimes can't eat. You couldn't eat meat on Friday when I was a kid. If you had a hot dog, you were going to go to hell. Give me a break. It's crazy. Anyway, I'm sorry. Mine. So you have dogma, you have rituals, you have prescriptive behaviors. You have to do these behaviors. And then the fourth one is there's a theology. Now, if you look up the word theology, it will say a study of the attributes and the nature of what people call God. The three principles have no dogma. You don't. It's just an attempt to describe the system of creation and the creative force and our connection to it and how we're using that to create our experience one thought at a time. No two human beings have ever had the same experience as alive. Even identical twins' brains start to change very soon after birth. Very soon. There's a study of 12,000 identical twins. Very soon. Because they're using the power and the gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness from the time they're born, at least, if not before. But it is a theology. It's saying that what Sid saw was that as the quantum physicist, do you know that he spoke to quantum physicists and they asked him back for 3 more days, and these are PhD physicists from MIT. And when my friend Dick Bozoyan, when he started saying that because Einstein didn't understand infinity, his formulas were not really accurate, he got really insecure and he stood up and said, talk more about the principles, Sid. And 4 of the physicists said, sit down, Dick. He's on to something.
I didn't know that.
Amazing.
Wow.
Amazing. I've got that on a video of my interview with him. He was there. But Sid saw that what people call God is the energy of all things, in form or formless. It brings simplicity, incredible simplicity, but that's what the quantum physicists are starting to see. And he saw that the nature, this is what's revolutionary, that the nature of that system is benevolent. It's always trying but it works within allowing us to have our own free will. You know, when I do that example of the flowers turning towards the sun, I say, even the adolescent flowers turn towards the sun. All of them turn. They don't fold their little leaves and say, make me. I'm not moving towards any sun. You can't try to, they don't. But we have the power to say, I'm going to follow this rather than this. And every time I've done that, things have not worked out real well. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room. So, but that's okay. We're just stumbling and bumbling along, learning incrementally, But anyway, so it is revolutionary. The idea that Sid even says in the Light and Gardner Revision, purity of thought is love. Purity of mind is love and understanding. Purity of consciousness is love. And you've probably heard me say, Sam, that there's an organization in all 195 countries. Have you heard me say that? That's based on unconditional love. Did you know that? Did you know that, Jim? They're all 195 countries. There's this organization. If that was true, that would be some pretty good circumstantial evidence that what's at the source of life is love, right? You could also say, how many songs are there about love? And they seem to make the top hit parade much more than the songs about hate and anger. The evidence is everywhere, but there is an organization in all 195 countries based on unconditional love. Are you curious of the name of it? It's called grandparenting.
Oh.
Think of it. Yeah. Not everyone. Most grandparents love unconditionally because what? We wanted to love unconditionally, but our fears, our beliefs, our expectations too often got in the way. Got in the way. Grandparents have been able to, a lot of times without maybe a global understanding, they've dropped that and they've just loved unconditionally.
I love that. I can see it as well in my mum and my son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like a second chance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to mention this little book, Coming Home, a book of poetry, 65 pages of rhymed poetry written in iambic pentameter, which is what Shakespeare wrote his sonnets in. My wife wrote, my late wife, who died in 2000, and Linda and I met 3 years later. We were both widowed about 3 years. She came to speak at the medical school on Valentine's Day on the healing power of unconditional love. And we got married 7 months and 6 days later. So we've been married 20 years now, coming this August. Anyway, but my late wife, Sue, and she had a depth of wisdom that was powerful. In 1985, she looked at me one and a half years after we'd met Sid, or 84 maybe. And she said, Bill, this is really simple, isn't it? I was not making it simple. Have you heard me say this? Yeah. And she said, I said, well, what do you mean it's simple? And she said, well, it's just simple. I said, what's simple about it? She said, well, I see that every human being on earth, every moment of their life is one of two places. They're either in their thoughts or they're in their life. You can't be both places.
I have heard you say that, because you say that on the Love Letters video, don't you?
I don't know. I may. Sounds like I'd say.
I saw you yesterday do it, so I'm pretty
Sounds
sure.
like something I would say, because children, when they're playing, it's not that you're not thinking. A good soccer player or a good basketball player, it's not that they're not thinking, but they're not in their thoughts, or they're not going to do well. They're in their life, accessing that wisdom every second at the time to do next, not even knowing why they're doing it. Some of those soccer players that suddenly do that back kick and kick it into the corner, they said, I don't know, I saw the ball coming and I knew what to do. So she wrote this over a weekend when we adopted our second little girl, and who's 38 and is just a wonderful, beautiful soul and funny. Whenever she calls, if I've got a full bladder, I'm in trouble. I immediately ask to go to the bathroom, because I don't know what she say. She says, I won't even. She got so, she's a head dispatcher, 911 dispatcher. And the sheriff that she works with, and she's now in a supervisory position and hiring and firing, and and she had severe ADHD. She was brilliant, but she graduated with a 1.67 something. I don't know. But she had higher SAT scores than her sister, who was a biological, who went to Stanford for the graduate school. Maggie had higher SAT scores. She's brilliant. And now she lives in such a state of mind the vast majority of the time that she's brilliant. And so she says to the sheriff, she got really, I won't go on the whole thing. I probably shouldn't even do this, but she had kind of a temporary meltdown and was really upset. And she said, then she said to him, so now I understand why you don't arm the dispatchers. Well, nobody would say that. He said, yeah, I understand. But nobody would say that, but she would, But anyway, so I'm just going to read. Have you, Jem, it sounds like you have, Sam, but have you ever heard me read from this?
I haven't, no.
I'm going to read the title poem. It's 8 lines. Coming home to peace and quiet. Coming home to feelings warm. Coming home where there's a fullness, where love in me is born. Coming home's a simple journey. It takes no movement on my part. Instead of listening to my thoughts, I listen with my heart. Wow. Now, people can see that as something to do. Oh, I need to start listening with my... It's the spiritual understanding of who you really are, that you're divine energy in form, and you're the formless energy that has been given the power and principle of thought to create little thoughts. It's that spiritual understanding that allows you to effortlessly listen beyond your thinking to your heart. And in the little preface, she said, coming home is about coming back to myself and my own wisdom. I think it's about finding that peaceful place within, a place where I feel secure and full. I haven't met the person that doesn't want that. When people say this person is resistant, I say, when you experience resistance, what you're looking at 100% of the time is lack of hope.
Wow.
Because as soon as hope is awakened, resistance melts like a snowball in August. Coming home was written as a celebration as I began to realize. She didn't say I saw the whole thing. I began, turned in a different direction. I began to realize that the only thing, only is one of those big words like all, that takes me away from a peaceful life, meaning that peaceful life is our home, it's our default setting, is traveling in my own thoughts. It's the only thing. To come home, I only needed to understand what thought was, the power of, and how I used it. When I am home, the world is a wondrous place, even though it's temporary. Here, it's our second home, going back to our first home. To all who have searched, welcome home. I see that it's just about time.
Thank you
It's
so
delightful.
much.
And I'm glad to, the next time, talk a little bit more. I would encourage your listeners to watch some of those stories of hope. So they're in the first one, especially One Cause, One Cure. So, and of course, if you can let at least people know about my course, because there may be some people that have the means, if they do a payment plan or something, because it's going to be special. I mean, I'm even within each 2 weeks, I'm going to be spending a lot of time making it a rich experience.
Well, it starts on the 26th of March, doesn't it? So would you like to tell everybody about the course, and I'll put a link in the description for them?
Well, and I'll have Leah, I'm going to hook Leah up with you guys and gals. And but yeah, it's called Never Broken, Nothing Lacking. One Cause, One Cure, Fresh Hope. That's what it's called. And it's about you don't have to choose between having spiritual understanding and scientific knowledge, because spiritual understanding brings spiritual healing. It brings spiritual healing. And when spiritual healing occurs, it maximizes the breadth and possibility of physical healing for people that have chronic pain. I could tell stories forever about people that had one insight, that forgave themselves or forgave somebody else. They saw psychological, and their pain of 19 and 25 years disappeared in a second. So we can talk about that, and next time any way you want to, but physical and mental illness, and peace of mind matters. It just matters. It matters to all 50 trillion cells in our body. And it isn't something to frighten ourselves with. It's something we're just going to do the best we can until we die. I saw a study last week that said 73 to 77% of people eventually die. That's a joke. Jim is wait, doesn't everybody? Yeah. That's the inconvenient truth. But if once you don't fear that, you're free to really have a fun time and a gentle, loving time while we're here. So I've gone over my time.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a gentle and loving time spending it with you. So thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
we look forward to the course, and we'll put all the details underneath the YouTube video, and we'll share it all over social media. So yeah, it's been a real privilege to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Good. I will send you later today. I'll send the link to Leah, and I'll let her know about that, both of you. Then I want her to be able to be on the course. So peace. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, Bill. And
yeah.
we both, Moles and I, had not quite a few, we had some questions for you that we just didn't want to even start going through, because I've just been having the most wonderful experience. So we would love to get you back on, maybe not 6 months, maybe 6 weeks, a couple of months, but where we can really interact and really dig into your brain, because I've got quite a few questions, but I'd love to hear your expertise and opinion on next time. But it's been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
You'll find a lot more useful information accessing my heart rather than my head. But there is the knowledge that we have is not if it's used in harmony with wisdom, it's powerful. The intellect is a beautiful gift, and so yeah, I'm glad to put the two together as best I can. Peace. Peace.
Thank you so much. Much love, Bill. Thank you.
So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you so much to Bill for coming on the show. Please subscribe and share this episode, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.